This Joe Barry defense, how did it start? And what was it designed to take away? What is it about this defense that's not doing what the defense is designed to do? And how can it be fixed? Cody Alexander, the author of Match Quarters, he literally wrote the book on this defense, joins me on the show today to talk about all of it.
You are Locked On Packers, your daily Green Bay Packers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On Packers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm Peter Bukowski, and I cover the Packers for The Leap, a newsletter I would love for you to subscribe to. Follow me on Twitter, Peter_Bukowski. Follow the podcast on Twitter, Locked On Packers. Like us on Facebook. Subscribe to the podcast, iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, wherever you find podcasts, you will find Locked On Packers, the #1 Packers podcast on the internet, and the show for fans who know what happened. They want to know why and how. Thanks to everyone who makes Locked On Packers their first listen every day. We hope you like starting your day with us as much as we like starting our day with you. Cody Alexander, the man behind Match Quarters, which is a Substack. It is a podcast. It is a set of books about defense. He has forgotten more about defense than I will ever know, which is exactly why we have him on the show today to talk about this Joe Barry scheme, this Vic Fangio scheme, which is really a Dick LeBeau scheme, all of that stuff. This is, man, we have gotten in the weeds on football talk this week, and I'm not mad about it. In fact, I'm really excited about it. I had a great time. I hope you did too. And this is an awesome, awesome conversation with Cody. Finishing off what I am sure is the football nerdiest week in Locked On Packers history. I wanted to talk defense. We spent a lot of time talking about the offense, the Shanahan tree, and all that stuff. Let's talk some defense with the man who literally wrote the book on Match Quarters, Cody Alexander. And Cody, it is so awesome to have you here. I was telling you before we came on that when Joe Barry was hired in Green Bay, that I went to your page and just like did a big download of all of the things that I could find to understand what Joe Barry is trying to do, the origins of this system. I want to talk Packers-centric stuff in just a second. Let's start with just this Fangio tree of defenses. And let's go back as far as we can go. What did that come out of? Like, what was that originally designed to stop? What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so if you actually want to go all the way back, rewind it all the way back, the Fangio system and the tree and the language and all of that actually started in 1986 with the Philadelphia Stars that staff with Jim Mora Sr. transitioning to New Orleans Saints. And that original staff in 86, and all of that language, for the most part, is very familiar to Dom Capers, which is no surprise to anybody. Evero in the Panthers, go look at who his senior defensive staff member is, and it's Dom Capers. And then Dick LeBeau is also another major offshoot of this as well. It's actually funny. I started really writing about a lot of the Fangio stuff because I wanted to kind of nail it down and put everything together this offseason. And I had so many older coaches hit me up and like, this is Dick LeBeau, right? This is Dom Capers, right? This is all the way back. And in fact, it kind of how weird this world works with social media is, in fact, Jim Mora Jr., the one that's at UConn right now, we started talking. I actually went and visited him at UConn this year. Had John Pagano, who was on staff at the Broncos for 2 years with Fangio, and I was able to just sit down and kind of talk to them through some of the stuff and just kind of – so it's wild. But when you really break it down, that's where this stems from. So when you start saying Dom Capers, you start saying Dick LeBeau, especially with Dick LeBeau, you start thinking fire zones, a lot of these pressures, using the safeties a lot. Where Fangio is different. And so where does this iteration come from?
Sure.
Really starts with the 2 safety shell. And starting in 2020, it was never really done. 18, it becomes pretty famous because of the Super Bowl, and he starts making a name for himself because of what he did to the McVay system. But no one really until 2020 had ever said, we're just going to play defense from a 2-high shell. And I want to preface this as well. This does not mean cover 2. This does not mean quarters. This does not mean even Fangio's famous he kind of has his own system of quarter, half that he runs, cover 6 and cover 8.
Yep.
But this is a cover 3 base system that is going to play everything from the table or from safety depth, meaning I'm giving you a static 2-high shell on most of our snaps.
This, if Packer fans just had a little shiver and they did the thing from Avengers Endgame where you could not live with your failure, and where did that bring you back to me? When they heard Dom Capers' name, because Packer fans were very ready to see Dom Capers go, forgetting that Dom Capers won them a Super Bowl. That defense was really good for a long time when they had some good players in that system. But this has evolved. And one of the things in the Play Caller series, which, listeners, I promise we'll stop talking about it at some point, but it won't be today, because I just am obsessed with it. This came out of this idea of, okay, this is designed for a lot of different things. Obviously, defense is designed to stop all kinds of offenses. Why is it such a good match against this Shanahan wide zone play action scheme?
Yeah, you really play these wide 9s, right? Or wide 5s, however you want to play this, whether you're in the nickel, which is a 4 down, or you're in their penny, which is a 5-1. So you have your 3-4 structure. You just only have one back, or you still have a nickel. So what it does is it essentially bottlenecks all of the outside zone run. We can't do our bootlegs. We can't do our outside zone. And then in the secondary, it allows you that freedom from a 2-high shell to really leverage crossing routes. What beats cover 3 more than anything else? It's those deep crossing routes. If you watch college football at all, you've seen Y cross. It's an air raid staple. And I think, you get college OCs like brag all the time, like, hey, we run Y cross on every pass play. We just dress it up, right? Differently with motion shifts and formations, right? It's like we only have one pass concept. So it's like that play has become so good at beating cover 3 because of the last kind of phase we were in the NFL, which is cover 3 dominant, Legion of Boom, Seattle days, is that now if I put 2 safeties high and I have 2 corners outside, I have created an even shell. So whatever you give me, we can match it up because we're even. So you send a quick motion across. I've got a corner on the other side to pick it up. If you send, if you give me some sort of a 3-by-1 alignment and you run a crossing route across, but then you stretch me vertically off of it, I have a safety on the other side that's going to cut that off. So I'm putting an athlete on an athlete at every situation that you get. And then I'm bottlenecking everything that you're trying to do in the run game, and I'm forcing you to do something that you don't want to do. It's kind of like the old Bill Belichick adage of, I'm going to make you left-handed. And that essentially is what this defense does. It floods the intermediate zones. It creates nice edges on the box, and it forces these offenses to really do what they don't want, which is 3 to 4 yard gains in the run game, and then dink and dunk to these flat areas in the pass game.
And so the Packers brought this in with Joe Barry in part because Matt LaFleur said, look, this is a really hard defense to prepare for. It was a defense that they had, they beat the Rams with Aaron Donald and Jalen Ramsey and all those guys in the postseason. They had to be really, really patient. They had to stick with their run game. And eventually they hit the one play action shot that they needed to hit to put the game out of reach. That's not how teams want to play, to your point about being left-handed. They want to create explosives. And now the whole league is going, well, hey, if we put an umbrella on these offenses and we force them to go 10, 12, 14, 16 play drives, they're probably going to screw up in there somewhere. The question, I think, is how are you able to, because the Packers have not been able to,
right,
fit the run out of some of these looks. They are giving up explosives at such a high rate in the run game, in part because their alley defenders and their safeties playing from depth have just not been good enough. So what is the best way to try and fit the run while understanding, okay, we want to live in this too high world?
Yeah, and in fact, you can use the Packers as a great example of it. In fact, I wrote this on my Substack after it happened. You go back to that year where Aaron Donald was kind of hurt, right? He was only playing like was really playing with one arm. So what did the Packers do? They got in 3-by-1, and then they just ran the ball. And they said, your safeties aren't going to be able to tackle from depth. And sure enough, we're hitting the A gap with these inside zones, and that safety isn't able to make a tackle. And you're able to get these huge chunk plays and run against the Rams, which nobody had really been able to do. In fact, even you go to last year, the Rams were one of the better run defenses in the league, but they were giving up so much soft coverage that teams were like, fine, we'll throw 5 yards and we'll get, like the 49ers had more yak. I mean, it was like 70% of their passing yards against the Rams were all yak. So when you look at a system and you watch the Packers, it really becomes evident of when you isolate safeties from depth, they really have to be good tacklers and they have to fit well. And so when you do kind of this where the linebackers are really ball fitting and they don't have single gap structures where they're just running through gaps, and you're getting a lot of gap schemes and you're getting some of these zone cutbacks, and these linebackers, if they get caught on one side or the other, now that safety is required to make a play and he's got to come from 12, 15 yards. And a lot of times it just doesn't happen. So to your point, when you run this system, yes, you're going to be good defending the pass. And for the most part, you are, minus the Vikings last year. But for, the Packers the Packers. And then the Rams was a completely different issue on its own. That's a talent issue. I think they would even admit that. And most people would admit that. But when you look at the Packers, top 10 DVOA in pass, right? But then you look at the run game, they can't stop anybody. The Eagles were kind of in the same boat. Now, they're not true Fangio, but they were kind of in the same boat. But they had elite talent on the D-line to kind of mitigate some of that stuff. That it was like, okay, we'll figure it out as we go. We'll give up 5, 6, but we're not going to give up these explosions over and over and over again like the Packers. So that, to me, when you watch them, they're getting beat up inside. So your inside guys aren't really holding these double teams. And what that's forcing your safeties to do is really make these tackles in space instead of a phone booth.
We're going to get back to our conversation with Cody Alexander here on the Locked On Packers podcast. Before we get there, our partners at eBay Motors have teamed up with Locked On Fantasy Football host Vinny Iyer to bring you some of the best fantasy picks all season long. Whether you're prepping for a draft or scouting the waiver wire, every week we're going to provide you players that are guaranteed to fit your roster. So with draft prep underway for the upcoming season, let's see who Vinny has picked out for us on this week's eBay's Guaranteed Fit Fantasy Pick of the Week. Let's start with Austin Eckler. Which running back has scored the most TDs combined the past 2 seasons? That's electric Los Angeles Chargers running back Austin Eckler, whose 38 scores since 2021 and feature receiver first role make him a guaranteed fit for the first overall pick in your 2023 fantasy football drafts. Eckler will see his usual high leverage work as a runner and remain the focal point of the short passing game. Vinny Iyer from Locked On Fantasy Football is going to help you win your fantasy championship, and eBay Motors knows a championship team is about each player being a perfect fit. It's the same thing with your vehicle. With eBay Guaranteed Fit and over 122 million parts and accessories for your vehicle right at your fingertips, you can make sure your ride stays running smoothly. Air filters, brakes, batteries, taillights, alternator, shocks, struts, you name it, eBay Motors has it. And they'll make sure it's the right fit for your car, because eBay Guaranteed Fit helps you understand exactly what part you need for your vehicle the first time. So go forth, switch gears, crank the AC, and say goodbye to sweating if your ride needs a little fixing up, because you know you'll always be set up for success from the get-go. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, everything your vehicle is calling for is just a click away. For the parts and accessories that fit your vehicle, just look for the green check. Get the right parts, the right fit, and the right prices at ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers, eligible items only, and exclusions apply. And thanks to everyone who makes Locked On Packers their first listen every day. Every dayers next week on the show. We are one step closer to training camp. So much more here as we ramp up to the 2023 Packers season. All right, back to Cody. Robert Saleh in the interviews for the podcast, and then also the Packers in their pre-draft process last year talked about wanting to get more penetrating interior defensive linemen. They said, we want to get a 3 technique that can get into the backfield. And they drafted Devontae Wyatt to try and do that. Now, they didn't give him many opportunities to go play and do that. But what is it? Like every defense would probably love to have defensive linemen who get into the backfield. But there's also this idea of being able to hold up against double teams, to your point, and control blocks. The Rams, that gap and a half methodology requires you to read and react and do some other things. So what is it about the penetrating defensive lineman that fits into what the plan is here?
Well, you go look at just who ran the most quarters last year. Okay. You've got the Jets. strong interior defensive line. You've got
Yep.
the Eagles, strong defensive interior line. You've got the Commanders, strong defensive interior line. And then you have the Titans, who I'm pretty sure they've got pretty good guys inside. So
yeah, Jeffrey Simmons, pretty good.
Yeah. So it's like you look at who these guys are and you're like, oh, well, that makes sense. When you are going to play quarters, cover 2, the cover 6, cover 8 stuff that Fangio does, you have to have good interior defensive line, or you're going to have to stunt a lot. And when you stunt, there's a little bit more opportunity for opening up for the run game and certain things if a guy misses or he doesn't go in the correct spot. So when you look at that becomes kind of the issue. So then you say, okay, well, let's go into a 3 down front. Let's get 5 guys on the offensive line. Now you're seeing more and more teams with 12 personnel. They're running gap schemes. Now they have the angles in the gap scheme. So and again, defense is not fun to call. It's one of the worst jobs. Being a defensive corner, especially in the NFL. And remember, I come from a Big 12 background. I was at Baylor when we were scoring 70 points a game. So it was like, I lived that in practice. Like when you can't stop anything, is just like, you understand like how important it is. We didn't get good on defense like a Baylor, for instance. We weren't very good in 12. We were definitely not good in 11, but we became really good in 13 in order to win that Big 12 championship when we got interior defensive linemen. And then we had edges on the outside. So we could run our quarters games, right? And so you see this even in the NFL. You see this when you have good interior defensive line play. It keeps your linebackers clean. And now your safeties have that time to hit. It's one thing when I'm playing from the table and I have a couple of seconds to work vertically down into the box than it is to, oh crap, that guy just hit that gap. I got to go make this play. And I'm 15 yards down. And I don't care if you run a 4-3. You can't just run in there like a bull in china shop. You have to have leverage. You have to make solid contact. And you see that a lot in the Packers film is safeties making contact, but the guy's not going down.
Yeah. Unfortunately, that was a big problem last year. And guess what? They are keeping Darnell Savage and Rudy Ford, and they let Andrew Namath walk, who was their most reliable tackler. So that's a bold strategy, Cotton. We'll see if it pays off for them. I'm a little confused as to why they didn't go out and get a veteran safety, but they didn't. They did make one adjustment late in the season post-bye where, as opposed to playing, you mentioned this base cover 3 idea that it's not just, the genesis of this is not this quarter half world. They started playing more cover 2, which is Joe Barry's bread and butter. That's what he grew up in the Tampa system.
Right.
They played more quarters. They played more cover 6 and cover 8. So as a defense, how does that change what you can do? And what did you see, if anything, change in what the Packers were doing?
Yeah, you really have to become more of a movement based up front. And you really have to rely on your backers making plays in there. I think with the trap 2 stuff or the cover 2 stuff, now we can give the illusion of, hey, we look like single high. We're going to move to cover 2 post snap. It just opens things up for you. Now you're inviting more of these throws to the flat, which we're playing cover 2. Now you just do it to our guy. It counters some of these RPOs that you're seeing, these play action passes that you're seeing at a single high, a lot of slants, a lot of these, I call them fins. So 5 and in, a lot of these like quick crossing routes. Now we're cutting all of those when we go into cover 2. And then 2, it alleviates a lot of the pressure on some of the DNs to always be setting a box. Now they have a little bit more freedom knowing that they have maybe a nickel or a linebacker outside of them because of drops. So to me, cover 3 is great to stop the run, right? I want to get guys up, but then you open yourself up now to a lot of you're doing exactly what a lot of these offenses that the Packers were seeing wanted them to do. And so now it's a way to, I think for them to, now we can get a little bit more solid up front. We're still going to play in the secondary with this cover 2 mentality.
One of the things that I particularly liked about the shift to more cover 2 is it meant your boundary corners at or nearer the line of scrimmage than they were otherwise.
Yes.
This is the biggest complaint from Packers fans. You mentioned the soft coverage in LA. It's been an issue at times in the other LA with the Chargers as well, who, by the way, they also can't stop the run to save their lives. What is it about the responsibilities the corners have and their landmarks that say, okay, you're going to play at 8 yards depth and we're just going to let things happen in front of us a little bit?
Yeah, I really think it comes back to that explosive pass, right? Is that if I'm going to play from off, I'm not going to let you just blow the top off there. And that's kind of where the yin and the yang comes, right? If I play soft, I know I'm giving up underneath, but if I press, I know I'm giving up the fade ball. So you really kind of have to, if you have, like, I think the Broncos were a great example of it. They were not a big press team, but they pressed in spots when they knew that they needed to. And so that way you can eliminate routes and eliminate receivers, especially when you have on-ball corners like the Broncos do. So
it helps to have Patrick Surtain. Yeah.
Right. And then Mathis comes from a Pitt program where that's all he did for 4 years, right? So it's like he doesn't know anything else. So you come to the NFL and it's like, hey, we're going to press. Okay, yeah, I can do that. So I think it's, the Rams last year are probably let's see the craziest side of what it looks like to not cover anybody tight. And then you get to where, like, the Lions, for instance, run almost like 80 to 90% press. And so it's like that also creates issues of its own when you make one mistake and now we're just throwing vertical shots down the field. So it's like, do I die by 1,000 stabs or do I just, hey, man, get my head chopped off in the first couple plays of the game? So that's kind of that dichotomy with it. Quarters allows you to play with a little bit more of a harder press. Cover 2 allows you to have more of a harder press. It closes a lot of these windows. You now have like a guy underneath and a guy over top with some of these outside receivers. So I think that's where you get the transition from there, is now we're not solo and we're just soft underneath, not necessarily for the run game.
All right, we're going to finish up our awesome conversation with Cody here in just a second on the Locked On Packers podcast. Before we do, though, I have to tell you about my new favorite brand, and not even so new anymore. In fact, back when they were our sponsor originally, I fell in love with Bird Dogs. Bird Dogs make you look good. They've got stretch khaki shorts that are designed to fit slimmer through the thigh and leg, giving you a truly sculpted look. That is something that I value a lot because it's hard to find shorts that fit well, especially if you are someone who needs athletic cut. And, from time to time, maybe all of us do in certain ways. Bird Dog shorts do the exact same thing as, say, Lululemon, but they fit way better. They have this cloud knit fabric that looks like khaki, but stretches to give you a way slimmer fit without the sacrifice of movement. That's my favorite part, is it has that tailored look. It's a modern fit, but you can move in them. That is hard to find. It really is. Go to birddogs.com/LockedOnNFL or enter promo code LockedOnNFL for a free Yeti-style tumbler with your order. I use it almost every morning in my iced coffee, or with my iced coffee, I take it to drop my son off at school, and it's got the logo on it. It's great. That's birddogs.com/LockedOnNFL or promo code LockedOnNFL for that free Yeti-style tumbler. You will not want to take your Bird Dogs off. We promise you. And thanks for making Locked On Packers your first listen every day. Everydayers, go check out The Leap, a newsletter I would love for you to subscribe to. TheLeap.football. We have the latest in our roster ranking series out today. That is my piece on, these are guys that are going to be contributors for the Green Bay Packers. It's some young players who we think can take that next step, maybe even a leap. And then some veterans who have some things to prove or are going to just be integral parts of this team. And go check out Locked On Sports today. The sports calendar is about to absolutely jump off. And we have a little bit of a break here the next couple of weeks, but if you still want that sports fix, we have it every day for you at Locked On Sports today. It's the biggest stories in sports in under 20 minutes. All right, back to Cody. So if you're going to make an adjustment, like if Joe Barry said, hey, Cody, let's talk about how we can fit the run a little bit better, or how maybe they know and it's like we need to execute X, Y, and Z better. What do you see there that you think, okay, this is where the improvement has to come for the Packers to be able to do this thing? Because as you mentioned, top 10 in pass defense DVOA, this team really started to take the ball away at the end of last year. Part of that was because they just started catching the balls that were thrown to them. I think they had 6 dropped interceptions in the first 10 weeks of the season. So what is your diagnosis and what is the solution here?
Yeah, you got to get better inside. So whatever that means, whether it's personnel or we need to be a little bit more movement based inside, how you're teaching that, how you're having them attack. Maybe you're more vertical attacking in the inside, clean it up a little bit more for the linebackers. To me, that's the biggest thing, because you can run cover 3 and you can put an extra guy down in the box, and that's great on some downs. But when you know you're playing play action teams, or you're playing teams that are going to run these deep crossing routes, it really makes it difficult. So I want to still play my safeties from the table. What that comes down to is just really controlling the line of scrimmage. So whether, again, that goes with personnel or becoming more of a movement-based to stunt-based front on first downs, changing the picture, trying to create some confusion for the offensive line. That's typically what you're going to do anyway if you're going to play a lot more split field coverage or from depth.
There's a lot of talent on this Packers team. Someone like Jair Alexander, I talked about this earlier in the week. I felt like the Rams at times with Jalen Ramsey got out of what he did the best to try and make him the queen of the chessboard. If you're looking at someone like Jair Alexander in this kind of defense, what do you think is the best usage for someone like that?
I just have them locked down. To me, I've always argued this. This is something that I always talk about, is if you have a boundary corner or a guy that, hey, I can handle the number 1 receiver on my own, then you have now eliminated that guy. It takes that pressure off that safety to then I've got to double or I got to go here. Now I can use that safety as an answer for a lot of different things. I can move him around. I call it safety spokes. You can move him down. You can move him outside. You can have him work with the number 1 receiver. You can have him lean on a different receiver. You can play split field coverage. You can have him in the box. I thought the Jets were a great example of being able to play quarters, but then stab their safety on early downs into some of these reductions and just really just blow up run games. But they're still playing quarters. They're still playing from their quarter space. So I think there are answers for you. But if you have a lockdown corner, a guy that can eliminate the number 1 receiver, let him do that. And by doing that, now I can take that safety and we can actually use him in a way that kind of gives us what the answer that we need for that week.
I have so thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. We could go on for an hour, but I want to be understanding of your time here. So let my audience know where they can find all the stuff that you do. It is, I seriously cannot tell you how educational it has been for me with some of the adjustments in the scheme, because this all changes so fast. And I think you do a really good job of explaining. I have a whole, where's my moleskin of notes of that. I'm just like, okay, here. So let my audience find all the great stuff you're doing.
Yeah, so obviously you can follow me on Twitter. Twitter handles on here. You can also find me on mostly anywhere where you use social media. Just type in Match Quarters, it'll pop up. I have Match Quarters on a Substack. I give you guys defensive content weekly, and that to me is kind of the engine that goes, and then that's kind of where a lot of this comes from. And obviously I have Match Quarters on YouTube. So if you're interested in going more in depth into scheme and kind of the evolution of things, I got 6 books on defense that you can find on Amazon, and of course links are on almost everything that I put out there.
Cody, this was awesome. Thank you so much. I will once again be in your DMs with clips going, hey, what is this? And so hopefully you can be of some help. I appreciate your time.
No problem. Thank you.
All right. Thanks to Cody for joining me on the show today. Awesome conversation with him. And I'm really excited about what we did this week. I've got a lot of people reaching out saying, hey, the show's really informative. Kind of going back to basics this week. If I had the foresight to think that we were going to do this every single day, we would have called it Back to Basics Week. But I didn't, because sometimes it just sort of happens that way. I've been really enjoying this archaeological expedition. I think Jordan Rodriguez called it, that she's approaching this football thing from an archaeological perspective with this series. And I'm glad that we've been able to create some shoulder content, some partner content that comes even a little close to matching what she has done there. Incredible series that I cannot recommend enough. Follow me on Twitter, Peter_Bukowski. Follow the podcast on Twitter, Locked On Packers. Like us on Facebook. Subscribe to the podcast, iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, wherever you find podcasts, you will find Locked On Packers. And anytime you want to come hang out with us live, we're going to be going live pretty soon here again on the Locked On Packers YouTube page, so you can stay Locked On Packers.